Good morning. Today is February the 12th, 2023. And today, here in the UK, marks the 30th anniversary since the murder of 2-year-old James Bulger. This is a day many of us will never forget. It was 1993. I myself had a child of 2 at the time, and what unfolded from the disappearance of sweet little James rocked the nation, and to this day still rocks the nation. His mother, Denise Fergus, has written a letter. She set up a foundation in the name of her dear son, and his brother, has also spoken out, and I will attach those to this video. It is important never to forget James Bulger, the little 2-year-old boy. As I say, it rocked the nation, but it also had a massive impact on Merseyside in England, the area he came from. Denise Fergus, James Bulger's mother, has written a letter, which I'll attach as I say. Sweet little James Bulger is the subject of this video, not the monsters that murdered him. However, for those who will not know, in other countries, this little boy was murdered by 2 10-year-old boys. The image that you see here, this blurry image, is the very last sighting of sweet, innocent James Bulger on the 12th of February 1993, being taken away by 2 boys and never seen alive again. The only reason I've put this heartbreaking image up, because it was the image that helped find the 2 10-year-old murderers. But I just want to read one article for you, just to kind of illustrate, if I can, the memories, one in particular, of that day, of that terrible day. I think it's important. It's important because here we are in 2023, and we are still seeing, sadly, what can happen to the sweet and innocent and vulnerable in our world. I think the shock for us back then, as it still rings out today, is the age of the 2 murderers. As I say, they were 10 years old themselves. And the way that they hurt this little boy is just indescribable. I have no words. And my heart goes out to his mother and brother, who has also, as I say, spoken about this. He never ever actually met his older brother because James Bulger was 2. He wasn't born yet, but he has an opinion and he's allowed that because it's impacted on their family. I have huge admiration for James Bulger's mother, who bears absolutely no blame in this. And that's the other thing here. We need to stop victim blaming because, as we know, and as this illustrates, even way back then, something like this can happen in a blink of an eye. A child can be lost, literally, in a blink of an eye. Denise Bulger, Jamie Bulger's mother, was in New Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle, Merseyside, shopping at about 3:40 p.m. in the afternoon. And she had James Bulger by the hand, and for a split second he let go, and that was it. And it was a split second. And this is the last image that was discovered, as I say. It still makes me massively emotional, as I know it does millions today. So I shall read the article that I found in the Liverpool Echo, from actually written yesterday on the 11th of February. Just to give you an idea of the events. It's written by Jonathan Humphreys, who's a crime reporter. And it goes like this from the article, and I shall read it as it's written and credit him in my description. February the 12th marks 30 years since the murder of James Bulger. Today, on the eve of the anniversary, crime reporter Jonathan Humphreys reflects on a crime which shocked Merseyside. Tomorrow, 12th of February 2023, James' mum, Denise Fergus, shares her memories of the fun-loving little boy she knew, and reporter Elliot Ryder speaks to the people of Bootle, also in Merseyside for those who are unaware, about the impact of the murder in 1993 and the effect on the community in the 3 decades since. As journalists gathered for a briefing at Marsh Lane Police Station on Saturday afternoon in February 1993, something different and something very, very dark was unfolding. Less than 24 hours earlier, no one outside his loving family and friends knew 2-year-old James Bulger's name. From the moment he vanished from his mother's side at around 3:40 p.m. at the New Strand Shopping Centre in Bootle, James was the centre of an escalating horror story that would make headlines around the entire world. A toddler missing since the afternoon of February the 12th and still not home the following day would naturally have been a significant story. But only 4 years on from the horrors of Hillsborough, which is another massive crime that happened in England, but I won't go into that now. And with the Hazel disaster and the Toxteth uprising still within recent memory, it would take something truly horrific to have a lasting impact on experienced reporters covering the city at the time. Horrific was what they got. In that room, in Marsh Lane, the media was shown those now infamous first gravity CCTV images of John Venables and Robert Thompson, as I show you here, leading little James away from his mother Denise as she paid for her shopping in a butcher's shop. Denise, at the very beginning of the hardest journey imaginable, sobbed uncontrollably as she begged to, quotes, bring my baby back, quotes. In that gathering of journalists was experienced Press Association correspondent Mark Thomas, who had previously worked at the Liverpool Echo and would later become editor of the Liverpool Daily Post and the author of Every Mother's Nightmare, a book about the case. Speaking in the Echo offices this week, he said, that's when we realised something a little more sinister is involved. In fact, it was interesting because at the time, CCTV evidence was still relatively new. So to have evidence like this, so crucial in a case, was actually new in its own right. So there was something unique there. Also at the press conference, Denise Bulger, as she was then, accompanied by her then husband Ralph, made an appeal for help from the public in trying to find their son, which was very emotional and quite difficult to watch. I can contest to remembering watching that. That's my aside. She was obviously absolutely distraught by what had happened, even at that point. Quotes, there was a hope, and I think it was a strange mixture of emotions, really, because the thought that two older boys were involved kind of made you think that maybe there was a more innocent explanation than you thought. Maybe some sort of really naughty mischief. Maybe they had locked him up in a shed somewhere. Or, well, who knows? All sorts of mad speculation went on, but everyone hoped he would be okay and didn't really dare to believe that boys like that could have done anything worse. End quotes. That evening, the Liverpool Echo ran a frontline page with that image and the simple headline, Find These Two Boys. In the Echo's offices, John Thompson had been recently promoted to the news desk after a couple of years as a crime reporter. He described how the confusion and desperation to know what happened to little James began to spread throughout the city. John said, quotes, you knew there was something wrong. There was something different about all of this. We had never seen or heard anything like it, so the public would ring in. Everyone began to feel it empathetically, the concern for a 2-year-old boy. Nobody felt like the family did, and like poor Denise Fergus, as she now is, felt, of course. But there was an empathy across the population, as there were after Hillsborough. Everybody felt sick. Everyone felt grief-stricken. Just under 2 days after his disappearance, the last vestiges of hope were extinguished. It was a group of children who came across the horrific scene where James had been left by the two schoolboy killers on a train line in Walton, 2.5 miles away from the New Strand shopping centre. Terence Riley, then 13, was one of that group, and later in his own troubled crime-ridden life, a court would hear how the discovery caused lasting traumas. As police and forensic investigators descended on the scene, it was quickly obvious to John and his colleague that there had been a significant and sickening development. He said, we were in the office, heartbroken, shattered, that this was the result. There was still hope that he would be found alive. While nobody thought for sure by any means that there would be positive results to this, there was still real hope that this was a missing child that would be found safe and well, and those hopes were very quickly dashed, and everybody felt the death of the child, poor James, in the pit of their stomach. Very quickly after the discovery of the body, it was obvious that James had not died in a tragic accident. Despite crude attempts to make it appear as if the toddler had been killed by the train, a pathologist found some 42 separate injuries. In the hours and days after details of what had happened to James began to emerge, the city began to feel different for many people. Mark, who spent hours wearing out shoe leather and speaking to locals in the communities of Bootle, Kirkby and Walton at the time, said, quotes, "People were absolutely horrified that a little boy could have been taken and murdered in these circumstances. And one of the extraordinary things was that the toddler rains started to appear everywhere." I remember myself using toddler rains and being glad of it. That's my aside again. Every time you saw a toddler, particularly in the Strand, but all over the place at the time, all of a sudden they would be attached to a little lead arrangement so that they could not run too far from their parents' grasp. That suddenly became quite a thing. It was a strange thing that kind of affected everyone's view of the innocence of children, because people started to think, could children really do something as wicked as what had just happened? For John, his network of contacts made during his tenure as a crime reporter meant it was not long before he learnt where the police were looking for answers. He says, "I recall finding out that the two boys had been arrested. I believe we didn't report it because we couldn't report it, but I knew their names, I knew their addresses, I knew where they had been arrested. I believe, before anyone else, I wrote a story for the Echo later that week saying that two boys were being held." It just rocked everyone to their core. Nobody could believe it, and everyone felt it. We were all sick to the pit of our stomachs at this news, and it seemed to be getting worse all the time. It was, as I say, an unbelievable turn of events. Those boys arrested after a witness recognised Venables, having spotted them playing truant around the Strand the day of James's disappearance, questioned by a team under the command of Detective Superintendent Albert Kirkby. The two killers did not take long to confess. At one stage, with prompting from his mum to tell the truth, Venables blurted out, "I did kill James. Will you tell his mummy I'm sorry?" Detective Superintendent Kirkby has spoken of the case over the years, but he told the Echo this week, "I feel after 30 years it's time to leave it in the past. But when you have seen and heard the things I did, you don't want to constantly be having it dragged up." Excuse me, I got horrible shivers up my spine again because I do remember this very well. But to continue on. For John, what reporters had been able to gather about their background offered few clues as to what compelled such an inhuman level of cruelty. He said they were both from ordinary working-class families in Liverpool. I was aware, certainly, that there were problems of a type in one of the families, but nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that would indicate anything that might happen like this with these two boys. You know, they were known to be truants from school. They skipped school, both of them. But there was no joining the dots together on this, on why this could possibly happen. It was still unfathomable. Mark was among the first reporters to catch a glimpse of the two young killers when they were charged with murder and sent to appear at South Sefton Magistrates' Court in a highly charged and febrile atmosphere. As a PA correspondent working on a pooled basis, Mark was one of a handful of journalists out of hundreds of the world's media to be allowed inside the courtroom. He said it was a very modern, light and airy courtroom, and I'll never forget to my dying day the moment when the two boys were actually brought into court, because the thing that stuck struck you immediately was how small they were. They were 10-year-old boys, but they were actually quite small for 10-year-olds. They looked bewildered, they looked confused, they looked like little children. I don't know what I expected, whether I expected a sort of creature with horns on their heads to emerge or whatever, because of what they had done. I just thought you wouldn't give those kids a second glance if you passed them on the street. It was an extraordinary thing to see. The initial hearing was brief, with the young defendants only asked to confirm their names and details. But as Mark describes, things heated up outside. Outside the court, a huge crowd was gathering of members of the public, and emotions were high as well, and there was a huge amount of anger. The case was moved out of Liverpool and sent to Preston Crown Court, where the two boys, now aged 11, stood trial on November the 1st, the same year as the murder. I'm going to leave that article there. I will put a link in the description if anyone would like to read it. I sort of feel it's important if people do read it, despite the fact that this crime, this horrible, horrible crime, was done 30 years ago, because it proves that we need to still remain vigilant. We need to stop victim blaming, and we need to try to open our eyes, do our research, and realise that monsters come in all shapes and sizes. My heart goes out to Denise and her family today. James Bolger, sweet James Bolger, will never be forgotten. As I said at the start, I will add a brief interview she did on LBC News, which is a radio station here in England, and you can listen to that. And I'll put some pictures up, obviously, of Sweet James, because I don't want to dwell on those monsters, albeit it's still an important issue within our laws about what happens if this sort of thing ever happens again. But it is about excuse me, I feel very emotional, remembering James today. We have not forgotten you, James, and we never will. God bless you. Sleep well with the angels. Thank you, Carrie Pink.
Somebody who remembers this story right from the very beginning. I was a journalist in Liverpool. The first thing I remember of this story is that dreadful press conference you had to give on the Saturday, which you describe in the book, pleading for whoever had James to bring him back. You know, that was the beginning of the story in my mind. But reading your book, what it does for me, and I think for anyone who reads it, is absolutely reminded me of the value of the life that was taken in this dreadful crime. Because intellectually I knew that, but emotionally I didn't know it until I read your book. And that's why you have continued to fight, isn't it? Because the value of James's life, in your opinion, is not taken into account by the law.
Definitely not, no. I mean, the ones who took his life have been rewarded all along. They've been given, chance after chance. As I say, they were getting everything that they asked for. They never spent no time at all in an adult prison. They got taken to a young offenders where they were released from there, so they never spent no time at all. That's all I asked for, was for them to spend time in an adult prison, stop getting rewarded every time. But that never happened in James's case, and that's why I continued the fight. And I do remember my solicitor saying years ago, if you're going to take this on, you are in for one long hard battle. And I thought, well, do you know what, I'm his mum, bring her on.